Here we go, no preface, no warm-up. There is a precise second when something inside you stops bracing for impact. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives like first light slipping under a door, a loosening you feel before you can explain it. If you've spent years wrestling with old scenes and unfinished sentences, this sensation can seem impossible. Yet peace often begins exactly this way, not by erasing the past, but by ending the civil war with it. Carl Jung devoted his life to understanding that alchemy. He showed how a psyche stops scattering itself across old battlefields and returns to its own center. What follows is not a pep talk or a trick of positive thinking. It's a guided walk through 5 deep signs that your soul has made peace with the past, grounded in Jung's ideas and tested by ordinary lives. Listen for what rings true. The threshold is closer than it looks. Before we get specific, a compass. Jung distinguished 2 kinds of quiet. The first is the brittle hush of repression, a lid clamped on a boiling pot. It looks calm from a distance but shatters at the slightest knock. The second is the supple quiet of integration. Nothing important is hidden. Nothing precious is denied. Attention is no longer spent on barricades. It's free to notice life. That difference matters. You can appear composed and still be at war with yourself. Peace isn't numbness, nor is it the forced smile of denial. It's a steady relationship with your own history, a way of standing where the facts don't have to change for your posture to. With that orientation, we can name the 5 signs. They don't blare like trumpets. They accumulate like seasons until the climate of your inner world has undeniably changed. Sign 1. The old triggers still arrive, and yet you remain a person. Earlier on your path, a certain tone, room, or smell could seize your nervous system in a heartbeat. Jung would say a complex had constellated. An emotional knot formed by undigested experience hijacked your present. In that state, you weren't responding to now. You were surviving then. Fight, flight, fawn, freeze. One of them leapt forward and ran the show. When peace takes root, the same cues land differently. Sensations rise, yes, but they move through. There's space between stimulus and action. You notice, name, and choose. Jung called this autonomy from complexes. Your consciousness isn't swept away by old weather. You might still feel heat in your chest or a tremor in your hands, but your voice stays connected to your values. You can say, I need a pause, that's not accurate, or simply no. The past stops dictating the script. Neutrality begins in small, almost unremarkable places. A song tied to heartbreak plays, and your ribs don't clamp down. A delayed reply doesn't send you spiraling into self-blame. You answer the message when you're resourced, not the second your phone buzzes. You end a conversation that turns cruel, not to punish, but to preserve the field you now tend. Your boundaries shift from barricades to bridges, built not from fear, but from clarity. This is not coldness. It's what mystics call sacred indifference, a warmth that doesn't wobble in pursuit of approval. You can witness another person's storm without becoming their umbrella. You can walk away without writing a thesis to justify your exit. The energy you use to spend explaining yourself stays yours. Your body corroborates the change. The shoulders that learn to live half-raised drift down without being told. The jaw stops grinding at 3 a.m. The gut unclenches on its own timetable. Confidence doesn't mean you never get flooded. It means you don't fear the flood. When intensity spikes, you don't panic about the panic. Hand to sternum, longer exhale. You let the wave crest and recede. What used to feel like fate begins to feel like weather. You can't control the sky, but you can choose shelter, clothing, and company. And you do. That choice, repeated quietly, is how peace becomes your baseline rather than a weekend destination. Sign 2. Solitude becomes fertile again. Early in recovery, silence can sound like an empty house after a departure. Too many echoes, too many doors leading down. When integration begins, aloneness stops magnifying absence and starts feeding presence. Jung called this individuation, the lifelong pivot from the crowd script toward the contours of your own nature. You no longer seek constant noise to drown yourself out. You want time with the one person you can finally trust, the you who isn't performing. The litmus test is simple. In the quiet, you don't reach immediately for distraction. You reach for breath, paper, strings, soil, prayer, sunlight through a window. The activity matters less than the stance. You meet yourself without flinching. From the outside, this can be mistaken for withdrawal. It isn't. Jung spoke of social saturation, a wise limit reached after years of overextending. You still love deeply. You simply stop spending hours in rooms where you must shrink to be welcome. In this quiet, creation returns without pressure. You cook because flavor delights you, not to manage anyone's mood. You garden because the soil steadies you, not to exhibit serenity. You write, paint, sing, code, sew, build, or design because something wants to move, not because a platform expects output. The nervous system no longer lives on a drip of intermittent validation. Solitude becomes a workshop, not a warehouse. Even chores feel different. Washing dishes is a warm water meditation. Folding clothes is a way of touching your life with order. Jung called this the religious attitude, not doctrine, but attention. It's a readiness to notice the sacred in the ordinary. Nightlife changes too. Dreams that once dragged you through old corridors begin to orient rather than ambush. Houses in those dreams open new rooms. Floods become rivers you can ride. Symbols arrive with a tone of guidance more than warning. The unconscious, relieved of replaying trauma, returns to its older work, carrying images from the deep that help the day cohere. Sign 3. Bonds built on shared wounds loosen without spectacle. Many ties are soldered by old pain, rescuer and rescued, critic and appeaser, runner and chaser. Jungian work names this transference. We cast an inner figure onto a living person, then choreograph a familiar dance. When healing ripens, that glue loses its chemistry. You don't stage a grand exit. The rehearsal simply stops. Calls grow less frequent. Obligations that were never yours fatigue themselves. You cease auditioning for the role you were assigned at 13. You don't need a villain to prove your growth. You don't need an audience to validate your leaving. You need clean air. This change arrives with grace rather than scorched earth. Family patterns can soften. The conversation that always ended in blame now ends in a boundary, and sometimes in a gentle reroute. I'm not available for that topic. The holiday you used to dread becomes a shorter visit with a clear end. You learn the difference between loyalty and self-betrayal, duty and debt, reconciliation and re-entry. Love gets lighter because it stops carrying what belongs to history. The paradox is tender. As your circles narrow, your compassion widens. You stop rescuing to avoid your own feelings and start helping where help can actually land. Approval loses its glamour. Respect, mutuality, and quiet truth gain it. Curiously, your environment reflects the pivot. Objects that once felt like talismans of identity, old texts, screenshots, saved voicemails, an overfull closet, lose their charge. You delete, donate, recycle, release, not as a ritual of erasing the past, but as an act of accurate weight. Your space arranges itself around function and affection rather than fear. Plants thrive because you remember to water them. Animals linger where you sit because your body reads as safe. None of this is flashy mysticism. It's the plain magic of coherence. When your inner rhythm steadies, the room takes the hint. Sign 4. Creativity returns as a current, not a crisis. For a long time, inspiration may have arrived only in the aftershock of hurt. Making became a way to alchemize pain. Noble but exhausting, integration changes the fuel. Jung described the transcendent function, a process in which the psyche, held kindly between opposites, generates a third thing, a new image, word, melody, method that doesn't cancel either side. In that atmosphere, creative energy flows on its own schedule. You are not wringing art from a wound or wringing productivity from anxiety. You're participating in a stream that runs whether or not anyone is watching. Effort remains, but strain recedes. Time behaves differently here. Hours slide because you're neither hiding nor hustling. You're absorbed. You forget the phone. You finish a small piece and feel satisfied without needing applause to make it real. Disruptions still happen, and yet your response has a pliancy that surprises you. The train is late and you sketch. The meeting shifts and you walk in sun. The recipe fails and you laugh because play has re-entered the room. This isn't passivity. It's active trust that life can be co-authored. Rigidity falls away. Rhythm takes its place. You move with time rather than against it. Sign 5. Mortality becomes a teacher rather than a terror. This is the shyest sign and the deepest. When the war with the past quiets, the future stops needing to be a shield. You can look directly at finitude without flinching. Jung wrote that maturity includes a turning toward the evening of life, not morbid fixation, but right-sized reverence. You sense yourself as a link in a long chain, a steward of patterns that extend before and beyond you. The fear that once drove relentless proving relaxes. In its place rises an ethic. Live in a way your future self could bless and your ancestors would recognize. Seasons help. Autumn feels like wisdom rather than warning. Winter reads as rest, not failure. You feel the kinship between sprouting and aging, beginnings and endings. Birthdays stop keeping score against you and start measuring depth. You speak to ancestors, literal or symbolic, and realize you are becoming one. A conscious ancestor who passes along less noise and more clarity. Decisions simplify. You choose what you can stand beside in the long view. You waste less time on arguments that don't ripen anyone. Gratitude changes flavor. It isn't gratitude for winning. It's gratitude for being, for breath in a breathing world. What does all of this mean on ordinary days? Colors sharpen because the lens is clean. Food tastes richer because you are present enough to notice it. Conversation deepens because you no longer audition for belonging. Silence feels full. Thought becomes a tool again instead of a tyrant. Ideas rise, help, and go. You don't chase them like weather vanes. You let them move like clouds across a mountain that doesn't. Jung might call this transparency to the eternal, the sense that your small, specific life rests in a larger life that isn't threatened by every gust of wind. Anxiety still visits, but it no longer rents the whole house. These signs rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They gather like topsoil, crumb by crumb, season by season, until one day you realize the ground can finally grow what you plant. If you recognize even fragments of this pattern, trust your evidence. Peace often hides inside plain hours. A kitchen gone quiet and a shoulder that stopped aching. A laugh that doesn't cut. A boundary spoken without shaking. A morning when your first thought isn't a catastrophe to manage, but a task you want to begin. These aren't small. They're the new climate announcing itself by weather you can feel. A few clarities help the peace endure. First, integration is not amnesia. You remember precisely, which is why you don't have to force forgetfulness. Second, neutrality is not indifference. You care more cleanly because you're no longer trying to settle old scores in present time. Third, solitude is not superiority. It's stewardship of attention, so you can give presence without bleeding out to prove you're kind. Fourth, boundaries are not walls. They are doors with hinges that work. Opened by respect, closed by disrespect, locked by harm, unlocked by repair. Fifth, forgiveness when it comes is not the same as access. One belongs to your heart. The other belongs to your calendar and your front door. Jung's language can sound lofty, but the mechanics are practical. Complex is quiet when they are seen, felt, spoken, and set inside a larger story. Shadow softens when it is named and given a job. Anger guards what you value. Grief irrigates empathy. Envy points toward unlived life. Fear scans for real risk rather than phantom danger. The persona, the mask you wear for the world, grows flexible when it serves relationship instead of replacing it. The transcendent function strengthens when you pause at an impasse and ask, what third thing wants to emerge here? And synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences Jung loved, seems to increase as your inner and outer lives stop arguing and start corresponding. If you're wondering where to begin, begin where you are. Test for peace in 3 places: body, attention, and choice. Body. What softens when you tell yourself the truth? Attention. What brightens when you stop managing impressions? Choice. What decision would make your future self proud and your favorite ancestor nod? Let those answers set today's small priorities. 10 quiet minutes instead of 10 noisy opinions. A glass of water before another scroll. A walk around the block instead of a walk back into a conversation that always collapses. 1 sincere message sent. 1 boundary kept. 1 promise to yourself honored on purpose. As peace consolidates, generosity changes flavor. You stop rescuing as a way to avoid your own loneliness. You start helping where help can land. I can do this, not that, you say, without apology. You offer fewer explanations because the life you're living explains itself. You no longer evangelize your method. You embody your values and let coherence be the invitation. Jung once observed that the most healing element in analysis is the analyst's own healed place. The same is true everywhere. Your regulated presence becomes a permission slip for others. You don't perform calm, you transmit it. None of this makes you invulnerable. Tender days still come. Old echoes call your name. Grief returns like weather. The difference is relationship. Pain is no longer a black hole. It's a passing front. You bring tea, blankets, and honest words. You cancel what must be canceled. You ask for company or quiet as needed. You refuse to take your hurt out on strangers. You do not apologize for needing time. You do not rush what becomes truer by brewing slowly. You trust ripening, and when you stumble, repair replaces shame as your first response. That alone is revolution. Eventually a final shift occurs. You stop monitoring your growth like a guard. You live, you go to the store, you laugh with the clerk. You forget yourself in conversation and remember yourself in prayer. You plant literal bulbs because spring is coming whether you measure it or not. You keep 1 promise to yourself each day and forgive the rest. Sleep returns as a lake rather than a ledger. In the morning, you meet your own eyes in the mirror, and there is a steady recognition there. No audition, no argument, just the quiet fact of a person you no longer betray. This is the radiance Jung meant when he wrote about reconciling opposites, not because one side won, but because a wider circle held them both. The peace you feel isn't fragile, because it doesn't depend on the world behaving. It depends on an honest conversation with reality, conducted in love and in boundaries. It is the peace of someone who knows what they can carry and what they must set down, who honors limits as forms of praise, who lets the past keep its shape without letting it keep the keys. In that atmosphere, life is allowed to be specific again, and you are allowed to be fully here. 5 signs then and 1 promise. When triggers meet presence, choice returns. When solitude becomes fertile, you hear what your life has been saying all along. When old bonds loosen, love gets clean. When creativity flows as a current, time returns you to yourself. When death becomes a teacher, each hour becomes a gift. The promise is that peace is not a prize for the deserving. It is a practice that becomes a climate, and climate changes everything. If you are somewhere on the way, take heart. The psyche keeps a wiser calendar than your plans, and it is on your side. Keep a gentle ledger of proofs, the softened shoulder, the unreturned provocation, the soup you cooked for pleasure, the call you did not make, the breath you took at a threshold and let all the way out. Trust the small radiances. They add up. One day, perhaps sooner than you expect, you will notice that the war room has become a chapel, and that the quiet inside you is not an empty room but a home.